declare the meeting open. So in doing so, can I remind councillors that the public section of this meeting has been recorded and made available on the Whakatane Regional Council website following the meeting and archived for 33 years. Those members of the public here today, all care will be taken to maintain your privacy. As a visitor in the public gallery, your presence may be recorded, and by remaining in the public gallery, it's understood your consent is given if your image is inadvertently broadcast. Also remind all present that local government decision making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during the meetings that is subsequently challenged in the court of law and determined to be slanderous. We start with the karakia from Councillor E.T.
Me tika te tātata hui me te karakia, mea noi tātou. Me honore, grori ki te atua he maunga, rongo ki te whenua e whakaro pai ki ngā tangata kato. Hanga e te atua he nākau hau, kei roto ki tēnā o mātou, whakatongia, tō wairua tapu, hei awhina, hei tohu tuhu ia mātou, kei roto i tō ingoa tapu. Amen.
So we have apologies today from Councillor Brunning, Councillor Crosby, apologies for a late arrival by Zoom, and if we're not finished in time, and apologies from Councillor Rose for departure.
So moved.
Thank you.
Or if we don't finish in time, I have to leave also by 12 o'clock.
Okay, in your hands. Noted. So it's moved, Councillor Thurston, I'll second. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Public forum, there is no public forum. Items not on the agenda, no items on the agenda. Any items for council late items? Not. Order of business, there's no changes to the order of business. Conflict of interest for any of the agenda items today? Councillors, appears not. Thank you. Public included business been transferred into the open, there is none. And we go through to the minutes, regional council minutes of the 1st of April.
Happy to move.
Oh, sorry, thank you. And on Zoom today we have Councillor Thompson, Councillor Rose and Councillor White. Okay, thank you Councillor Rose. Councillor Winters, second?
Seconding, and
Christian, yes, so have it moved and second, all those opposed say aye. Against, carried, thank you. Matters arising, Mr Winters.
just on page 17, Mr Chairman, and it's a procedural nature. Item 4, we considered an additional budget of 45,000 for youth engagement, and we moved that and seconded and carried that. However, at the deliberations, it was amended to 75,000, which means we have to revoke this one to implement a new one. And under standing orders, we have to have, and the alarm bells went off, Mr Chairman, when I saw this. I wasn't familiar at the time. Under our standing orders, we have to have a 75% majority for that, to revoke that one and to implement a new one. And I know we had lots of shows of hands on the day, but I cannot remember us having a 75% vote for this one. And it's a procedural nature. So to fix it, when we do our actual receiving of the minutes and the moving for the LTP in June, we probably need to do this again, Mr Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Winters. You're right, it is procedural, but can I ask you to consider the wording? So bullet point 4 there, it's not adoption, it says considers an additional budget. So there's no determinant in terms of the final figure. So I think that that the determination at the time of the deliberations becomes the preeminent resolution.
Right. So we're sweet.
Thank you for that. Anything else? If not, we go through minutes to be received. Whakatane River Forum, 4th of December. Move Councillor Winters, Councillor E.T. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Any matters arising out of that?
No.
There's not. That leaves us to item 9, presentations. We have a presentation by Phil Wardale on the Whakatane Boat Harbour project update. Welcome, Phil. Look forward to the presentation, and for those, I think most councillors should know you, Phil. You're don't know whether you're still involved, but your most recent commissioning in terms of regional council involvement was the marina project in Tauranga.
Correct. Yes, my team remains there. I remain contracted to the end of the year to help for the biggest of lifts. I'm the only current trained operator of the 350-tonne machine, which I think you'll all remember the regional council contributed 50% of the total $10 million initial budget at that project. Vessel works in Tauranga. Your Zoom participants, can they see me if I stand? Am I all right here, Connor? Or we're not?
Yes, they can.
No, that's good. Well, listen, thank you for having me. I wanted to provide an update. Provincial Growth Fund projects in this town have been underway for approximately 2 years. I almost celebrated last month the first visit to town, and I wanted to thank your council. I wanted to thank Fiona, who very kindly has had Chris Ingle and Bruce meeting with me regularly, and which has been most helpful, and to facilitate the regional council's portion or relevance to this particular project. And I was welcomed by one of the river groups approximately a month ago, which was really nice as well. So look, I pull out the USB and have a plug. So look, I just really wanted to recognise that many of you, I've never been on this project in front of you, so I just wanted to take a look back as to the nature of the funding of the whole PGF question in town. This will be not the first PGF project that's advanced, but it is sizable in its value and its significance. So I'll just remind you of some of that PGF makeup, the strategy there. I'll just tell you a little bit about the study that was done in and around the particular topic of the boat harbour and berthing boats on this river, and then just tell you a little bit about the concept and how it got to where it is, because I think when Minister Jones arrived in November of 2018 and announced some funding to help the business case, it was thought that it actually might be right outside you, right here. And so, unfortunately, with my influence, I took it somewhere else, and I wanted to tell you why. I'll tell you a little bit about the community feedback we had at that time, because the time frame when Minister Jones came in September 18, he said you can have 12 months to present the solution and apply for funding, and he contributed 50% of the work to deliver that business case. And then just tell you where we are today, and then tell you approximately what things may look like in the next few months. So just to remind you, the PGF opportunity in and around the country and the region really kicked off well in 2018. I and my team, we work in 2 surge regions, Wanganui, Manawa 2, the port project there, and here in the Eastern Bay. There were 5 surge regions. Those were regions that the Provincial Growth Fund felt their contribution would allow a really good outcome, and that allowed the region to decide what those outcomes may be. So they did really a really good job, in my opinion. They invested in regional strategy considerations, and what this region decided, that there was probably, I think I note, 65 projects across the region, but the green boxes really indicated where this region wanted to put its investment into. So Pauriki, as you know, was all about the aquaculture, the seawall, the groins. As a council with your regional infrastructure fund, you already knew that. Kawerau was all about the inland, the port, the inland port concept and industrial development. Around the region, there was a lot of specialist horticulture and blueberries and other opportunities on the whenua to actually improve. And right here in town, through the District Council, the decision was made to look at the riverfront, town regeneration, and as part of that, a bit of a wharf upgrade and some improvements to berthing. And that's where me and my team came in. So it was really well considered. The region was clear in what they wanted from the PGF, and that's why you saw a progressive set of announcements as those business cases were brought forward that aligned with the strategy and moved some of those projects ahead. So it all started because the District Council said that the wharf out front here, so I looked down that way, was broken. It needed to be replaced. The local engineer had said it was at end of life and it needed to go and it either be replaced or refreshed. And essentially what the Minister said at that time, look, I don't do wharves. He said, I don't do wharves, but I do strategies, and just come back out and tell me a little bit more about the front of your town and what that might look like, which fed into the strategy document. And he said, here's some money, go away and come back with the strategy, but don't just talk to me about a single wharf. District Council had a quick conversation with the community around the Provincial Growth Fund. As you can see, the first item with the biggest notations or conversation was about the riverfront, which is on the far left, and right there in the middle was a real recognition that marine tourism, berthage, place to store vessels was also high up in terms of comments from the community as what was appropriate. So that allowed the District Council to advance and say, right, let's focus on the riverfront, let's focus on the town centre, but listen, the vessels, the aqua and recreation tourism from vessels is important, so let's progress on that basis. We came and we did our first demand study like we did for Tauranga with Vessel Works, and what was really helpful in this town, the double berthing, the boats parked every which way, was really clear that town was really lacking in terms of berthage. There was wait list, there's a wait list at the town wharf, there's a wait list up at the yacht club, and a private marina developer had 120 people that said they wanted berths as well. So that was really helpful. We then focused in on the servicing, and as you know, all the servicing goes right out the door, out through the river mouth and heads to Tauranga currently, or further afield. And then there was the recognition that if any one of us in the room started a marine tourism business tomorrow, we couldn't start and berth a boat on this river. So there's no point us coming up with a dive charter or a fishing charter, because there was nowhere to go. Helpful when I put the drone up and the reserves full of cars. On this day there was 57 extra car and trailers on the reserve. The 52 car parks in the designated area were full. It was pretty helpful when you're doing a demand study to actually understand what was happening. The mussel, Whakatane mussels on the left was loading across the public promenade, so it's quite good for the prams and things wanting to go past there. And even after he had left, the ice truck arrives, and ice in this town, you might not guess that truck actually drove all the way from Auckland to deliver that ice to the boat here, and because of the capacities in town. So those things are all most helpful. New opportunities, obviously, as an interim measure, as we know, before they go to Whakatane, the mussel harvest is already here. And these are big 30-metre vessels. 2 of them are here now, they're double berth, they'll take wherever they can go at the moment. So those things were all most helpful. We also recognised, and people forget, that 2 of the 3 largest trailer boat manufacturers are right here in the town, in the region. Extreme are doing amazing things. They've built big sheds, they're investing in their business. They've got growth opportunities at the bigger end of the market, and they just can't provision enough. 1 boat leaves Extreme every day, currently under their production model, and he would ramp that up. His opportunities are constrained with employment. He can't get enough people trained inside that business. So again, really good opportunities for this town. Cities are not far behind and doing great things on their own side. So there's a quick look at the wharves, and I won't bore you with that detail, but it involved looking at if we could encourage put wharves back into the provincial growth application, what that might look like, and we were successful. This particular wharf at the very northeastern end of the wharf will actually be removed as part of the solution, but there was a full wharf consideration. This was just the line drawing of what the local engineer had come up with to get some berths in town. You can just make it out the yacht club building underneath the photo there, the existing berths in the yacht club. And the thought was to build something out into the river, and away you go. Build out and add some more berths. And I won't bore you with our professional opinion on this, but I'll put it down to my gut feel was that this was just not consentable. Too difficult to build a structure like that with reclamations out into the river, and my first few conversations with Iwi really ratified that for me. It was just not going to happen. We needed a solution that took things away from the river rather than adding things. So look, I won't bore you with the iterations, but we tried to work with it. We dragged it up the river, we dragged the shape down, we moved it a little bit around, they even brought it into the car park at one stage, and then did a half car park and half. But I met the minister several times. He said, "How are you going, Phil? We've got a good solution. Is it going to cater for the town for the next 20, 30 years?" And I said, "No, it's not really. It's stuck. It's quite small. It's only 30 odd berths. I can get to 50, but they're all not quite right, and there's no maintenance, and there's no travel lifter, and there's no crane, and I'm a bit struggling." So fortunately, when I say here, run up the side of the river once, or I'm not a runner, but recognised there's some green grass areas up the river, and look, apart from the holiday camp on the town side of the river, I recognised there was this side across the road in Keeper Road, and it looked quite attractive because it was just bare grass, and it looked like it was pretty close to the river. So look, by June 19, we used up nearly 7 or 8 months of the minister's 12 months. We started to look at this site, and I met with the landowner trustees, identified as a Maori land block, which I knew would genuinely unlock some opportunities within the Provincial Growth Fund with their whenua grant stream that we'd had experience with previously, and really looking at some opportunities that were much bigger than what was first envisaged when the minister looked out at the wharf that was close to end of life. So this 10 hectare block was stuck again, Fiona.
Jumping along here, it's just frozen up on the screen.
That's all right. And look, this block, 10 hectares, broken into two with a swale and a stormwater system, held by a Maori Land Trust for obviously a long time, been slowly reduced in size over the years with state highway, roadways, soil and conservation, and other. Now Tono, it's off on its own. Yeah, here we are. Great.
Okay, you just let me know where you want it to go.
We'll go one forward. Was an obvious opportunity because it was grown maize. It had about 2 metres of mill timber peelings deposited in it to lift it above floodplains. But in its location, it was at the bookend. We couldn't go any further upriver because of the bridge. It really was, as you can see there, probably one of the only, apart from the holiday camp and a little slither of soil and conservation here, it was probably the only site that could give an opportunity. I'm well aware private marina developer had suggested something here, but in my humble opinion, close to the river and in a logical location, this was it. So we had a quick meeting with the landowner trustees, and I left that meeting surprisingly with their support to investigate the site. So we're very late in the PGF project timeline, but we were able to complete some geotech, some investigation of that timber peeling. And the headline there was, this was clean timber peelings, pre-treatment, and secondly, the sands below where the river used to be was quite accommodating for future development. So we formally, I had a governance group who were saying, "No, Phil, we figured it's a town regeneration project, so stay in town, please." And I'm like, "No, I'm up here, the river." So we had to bring the governance group along, and you obviously had a representative around the table here on that governance group, where we finally compared the best options at Keeper Road with the option, and this is to scale, and that's the best we could do in town with the scale of something that was out of town and a little bit up the river. So essentially that dictated our focus on this site. So really what came next was something that I don't think had been envisaged with the PGF work, was a partnership that very quickly drove a relationship with the landowner beneficiaries. This was a landowner Hui in August. This was a mere 12 days before we submitted the application. The yellow sheets of paper was their vote to allow their land to be included in the PGF application and allow it to proceed. The very next day saw the signing of a partnership agreement between Paul Quinn, Ngāti Awa Group Holdings Chair, obviously the Mayor, and then two landowner trustees and a trainer, Runanga representative. And that was really a surprise to the District Council, the opportunity to come together in a project. That same partnership was not available in town, and it was only available with the unlocking of this particular Maori land block. So we celebrated that at the time. There was some media on that. This was the concept plan. The Minister said, how are you going? And I said, I've got a site, we've got a stage one. And we knew that everything in the stage one was fundable or co-fundable from the Provincial Growth Fund. We knew the Minister was happy on commercial berths. He wanted an unloading wharf for the mussel harvesters and the fishing boats. He wanted servicing facilities for extreme and surtees and any other vessel maintenance. He was pleased I could find a small travel lifter to lift boats out, and then importantly a training facility, recognising that we needed to train Te Ara Mahi initiative to bring people up to skills in both predominantly the marine industry but anything else. And we were finally, I was able to say to him, I found a site that we can stage. We can deliver an outcome straight away with your funding, but the second stage is going to be achievable, so we'll use half the field in stage one. The whole site was a really good opportunity for remediation. There's a dock site next door. There was an opportunity for offsetting of any effects and ownership and improvements next door, so that was another key component. So we quickly had a conversation, mainly with the marine sector, and I say in the first thing there was support, but there was surprise and there was shock with every one of those, because we'd actually come up with a solution that had everything that they wanted. And the shock actually came about because of the second bullet point, which was relating to the partnership. People in this town genuinely said, well done Council, of partnering with Ngāti Awa with a solution for this. And that's an absolutely aspirational outcome that's been achieved through the project. So it did everything that everyone wanted. Health and safety, security, it did everything. It allowed the participants in this town to be very satisfied that everything that they could wish for their businesses was able to be developed. So this was the concept that was developed about 3 days before the 13th of March 2020. As you know, 10 days out from lockdown, we prepared this visual simulation. Now, the subtle difference is I showed you a concept plan that was next to the state highway, and then we flipped it a couple of days before the announcement because we recognised that the preferred location for stage one was at the northern end, and as Chris Ingle knows very well, our focus was to share the access channel across the dock estate with the regional council's storm pump. So that's what was announced. The Minister arrived, a great fanfare. He was very happy with the outcome. People don't know he was born on a river port in the far north. He appreciates what rivers and ports, and you might, if you've seen the media across the PGF projects around the country, he had a real passion for understanding and making sure that assets like this were well considered. So that was the announcement day. This percentage-wise, at give or take 20 million of a $30 million project, apart from the Whakatane, which is a bit of a special project, we're almost second in the country in terms of a percentage of PGF to local funds. Considering this is an all grant, he announced that 19.6, which had a big component of equity because they actually believed in the project, and we were outside of the bounds of the capacity of the grant to carry into a project of this size. The thing that the Minister loved the most was the partnership and the initiative of bringing along the Maori Lands Trust, both the Runanga and Ngā Te Awa Group Holdings in the post-settlement solution, and then obviously council doing its bit. But importantly, like Hauraki, the Provincial Development Unit will be here for a lot longer because of that equity component. So look, post that announcement during lockdown, we raised a head, he wanted action, and so we had a quick look and we ratified some of our thinking with the northern entrance, and that was probably where my first few conversations with Chris Ingle and his team was. We'd always had the view that this pump of yours here is a storm pump, and this man-made channel across the dock estate was a logical entry into this Maori land block. We just needed to find the way to do that. And as of today, we are pretty confident with the support of DOC that the concept of widening that existing channel is better than creating a second channel somewhere else along there. So that's what we've been doing, and the time I've spent with Chris has been really focused on that and making sure we've got the outcome there. Obviously this is just showing you how your pump operates and what it looks like, and just to be clear, this is the boat harbour site here adjoining the site, and then obviously our focus has been on this. So since the announcement, we've just been working out what that looks like, getting the right channel connection to unlock this this block of land, and there's the land there, and obviously this is roughly what the channel entrance would look like. So we've spent a lot of time post that. The lockdown was helpful. The PDU was very clear they wanted work to progress as promptly as possible, and this was just some of the further analysis, surveying the river, understanding where we're going to be dredging. This shows you the rough channel coming past the existing yacht club. The blue is nice deep water that's already quite deep. The green are the areas that we'll need to touch up some dredging, and then crossing that flood channel and into the site. And that's loosely the project. The complexity in the project is not necessarily developing the boat harbour here, but the crossing of the dock estate, as you can imagine. That is the complexity. So that's the channel. And then into the detail, this is fully developed both stages, but essentially in this top half is everything that I mentioned within the Provincial Growth Fund application: berths, wharves, ice plants, fuel, training facility, cafe, small travel lifter, sheds, boat maintenance. Stage 2 line, and below the stage 2 line will be things that we think are easily fundable or more readily commercially fundable. There's 100 car and trailer car parks there for a public boat ramp, and just short of 70 quite large recreational berths. So those two components in their own should be quite fundable themselves. So since then, had the luxury of choosing a pretty exclusive team of experts from around the country to advise this project. Some of those have been taken from yourselves. You're using DHI a lot in this building, and Hale Environmental. So using some locals, Wildlands as well, but then drawing in Sally Gipp, probably the best RMA barrister in my opinion, and Mitchell Dacius as planner, two very experienced people that I've used elsewhere, and making sure we get the best outcome in terms of consent. So they've been building, all of these experts have been building our assessment of effects, as you know, progressing us to a point where we can file a resource consent application as promptly as possible. People thought when the pine trees started coming down we were underway and we had a consent, but no, we were just felling the pine trees to get them out of the way of the fencing contractor, etc. But we're well underway with that. You'll see some CCTV go up, some general health and safety items being installed just to really protect the site. But what's next? District Council has brought forward its Keeper Road upgrade within its LTP currently, out for a conversation. The road's very low in the middle, and so they're looking at raising that road, median, cycleway and pavement, so that we hope will progress through the LTB project and align with our linkage into the boat harbour. We will look to file that consent application probably in July or so. We should be ready by the middle of the year. As you know, that has that full assessment of effects, and we believe that this site outside of the river is quite easy to assess the effects because of that no direct contact with the river day to day. We'll head out into the community to have a conversation with what those findings are of those effects in probably late June into early July, and we'll look to formalise our crossing of the dock estate in June, July as well with an application, because we do need to formalise that. I thought I'd quickly, really quick, take you through a quick conversation about the wharves. I was fortunate enough to have the Minister agree on the wharf package as a sub-project, so we did sneak in the wharves as well into the PGF, and I've been responsible as project manager for your wharf works. Just over $3 million committed to remediate the wharves, and the story here was simply that upon reassessment, the wharves actually weren't as broken as we might have thought. They just needed expert rebuilding, and fortunately I rebuilt Auckland Council's Hobson Wharf with the Maritime Museum on it, so we brought the best experts in the country and town, and we found a way. So the really good news with this was, and you saw the Deputy Prime Minister come into town to announce this and sign the contract, or witness the contract being signed, we stood this up during lockdown. So by the time we came out of lockdown in July, we had a contract, the contractor arrived, and part of their community requirements on the contract was to employ locals. So they took on board a team of around 14 locals in addition to the experts from out of town, and have been underway with the wharf. So you might have noticed the noise as you've come into town with the hydro demolition, 20 to 30,000 PSI to demolish the wharf and then rebuild. So that work's been underway. It's very close to finishing. I hope to have a minister here probably in the next 3 or 4 weeks just to really celebrate that work. But that's something I can give anyone some further details on, but a really good news story. 2 subsectors of the wharf project. We also encourage the minister to upgrade the timber wharf that's closest to you here to improve the loading, because once the boat harbour's developed, those won't be berths any longer. They'll be loading spots. So you'll load your fishermen or you'll load your dive charterer on there. So we wanted to make that linkage really very successful. Kaianga, Ngāti Group Holdings development on the Old Army Hall will be underway by the start of next year, and that linkage will work. And then, as I mentioned to you earlier, this little timber wharf, a little bit of opportunity for a improvement to the outcome in the river, and being able to indicate to the marae that the view shaft could be returned out from the marae to the river by removing all of that wooden structure and returning that edge of the river to a more natural, albeit reclaimed state. So that work's underway. It had a great community outcome with employees. Some of them are going to be leaving town because they're now going to be going full-time with the contractor. So that was a really good outcome. It was intended from the PGF's involvement, and it's really worked well. And that work will be finished probably in June. A couple of pictures, because it's under the wharf. Those of you who've got a technical mind, this is removing tons and tons of existing concrete, finding the corroded reinforcing steel, and then removing that corroded reinforcing steel, replacing it, and then rebuilding those elements. So as you can see there, pretty lousy today, but by the time that's removed, some areas in fact were quite good. You take them back to the original structure with support and then rebuild. We're both rebuilding using formwork as well as some spraying. Here's a pile, that's how it started. It gets blasted down just to the core, steel gets replaced, and then recast, reformed, and it'll have a life a lot longer than all of us in the room today going forward. So that work's been completed, a really good outcome for town. And I thought I'd just finish with that because the conversation in the town with the minister started with wharves. We got there in the end with his co-funding, but he's, yes, even at a mess of trouble, he's really excited about the project progressing well. So,
Thank you, Phil.
That's helpful.
As you said, good things take time. But this is really impressive.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And still capital cost, we're going to have to work inside the budget. As you probably hear regularly, construction costs have been creeping up even in the last 2 years, so we've got to work, but hopefully we've got the headroom in the budget to do everything we want to do. And as we talk more with the community, we'll explain what that actually looks like in terms of detail. But that gives you a bit of an oversight.
Okay, prefer to ask a couple of questions from councillors, so I'll start. Mean draft, low tide, and as a consequence of that, the volume of dredges to be taken and where do they go?
Sure. So there's really 3 components of earthworks / dredging. There's one that will be in the river itself, and as you can see, helpfully, that outside bend in that location is actually quite deep, but we're taking around 20,000 cubic metres. Most of the dredging is in this river under the existing consents, all head out to a private property owner in Ferguson Road, I think, as most property owners slowly lifting their lands in Ferguson. Dredging your storm pump channel has a little bit of dioxin contamination in there. So with Chris's support, we're going to be putting that into the end of your zone that took the canal remediated material. There's some spare space there, and technically it's your storm pump channel, so of course I'm going to use your containment area. And then of course the boat harbour site has a lot of movement. Much of the budget that the Minister wanted to advance to the Lands Trust is to remove the existing wood peelings, and they'll go to cleanfill sites. We're going to try and make that transport distance short, so there's some up in Tania Tour is probably where much of that will go into a quarry location or otherwise.
Did you cover the mean draft low tide?
Oh, so the river component, they will be at -2.5 at chart data. Into the boat harbour, the deepest commercial area in the boat harbour will be -3. Constraint, I don't need to tell you, in this town is not the river, it's the bar.
Mr. Clark, Mr. Winters.
Yeah, I was just quite bemused by having found initially the wharf was budgeted. You at great expense, a team of engineers surveyed that wharf and found it needed completely replacing, and then all of a sudden, under a different set of circumstances, maybe it's not quite so started. How does that work when a council commissions engineers who give a report saying the structure is knackered, and then all of a sudden it's almost like cutting the cloth to suit the budget? It's not as knackered. Did you get the same engineers in, or did you get another set of engineers and you get a report?
Yes, and look, it's fair to say it's just a different set of eyes with an understanding of the skills that are now available. Helpfully, this started as a conversation where I went under the wharf, and it didn't look as bad as the Hobson Wharf that I remediated, Gorgon Council, as I mentioned. And so asked the question, bring the best experts in the country in, and then identified that it actually could be remediated rather than replaced. And so it is just experience and knowledge, possibly, and making sure the right sets of eyes are looking over that particular asset. I think it's the only way you could describe it. Can't put any icing on that, but it is what it is. Yeah.
Did the council get a refund from the original engineers?
Well,
No, we won't go there.
well, you know, I think you could say that some of those elements were at end of life, as you can see in the picture, and you can either say, let's call it end of life and remove it, or replace it, you know, remediate it. And now the technology is there to remediate.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Winters, anything?
Oh, thank you. Oh, great news all round, really. Just in terms of the water quality in the marina, because it's going to be essentially landlocked, one in, one out, tidal flows. Is that tidal flow enough to keep the water quality high in the marina?
Yes. One of the significant pieces of evidence that has been drafted was the company that yourselves use an awful lot, DHI, the experts in this field.
Yeah.
So they completed an entire model for that very reason.
Right.
Industry such as boat harbours and marinas has some world guidelines of water change times.
Yep.
And if you ever wish, the report will state that we're well inside the industry standard change times. The tidal influence goes well past the site,
Yes.
so we do get
Salt water.
exchange. We don't need to encourage exchange.
Yeah.
It'll do itself.
And Mr Chairman, great to see public access into that development as well, because being involved in that 52 car park congestion, great to see another opportunity for people to access the sea. Thank you.
That's correct.
Mr. Easier.
Okay, Mr Chair, thank you. This is certainly a council that appreciates the challenges of partnership with Tāngata Whenua, and that it is a journey. I'm aware that the Whakatane regeneration, town regeneration project has hit some hurdles with regards to the partnership. I certainly feel that it's best not to gloss over these things, that we have a good line of sight of the operating environment. And so my question to you is, considering the tensions between WDC and the Runanga o Ngāti Awa, how is that potentially going to impact this project?
They're two quite different projects, obviously, is the point I'd make. The conversation that we have with the community and the public announcements in June will all be about the partnership with Ngāti Awa and the Lands Trust, and that's very much focused on the boat harbour. That is not to say that, as you've indicated, the town regeneration stream is in a different place. It's not as advanced as what I'm showing you today on the boat harbour, and it needs more time. Two quite separate things, and the short answer is no influence relationship-wise between the two at the moment.
And so it's going well with Ngāti Awa with this project at the moment?
Amazingly, yes. The partnership and the public announcements will come in June. I'm wary of this being a public meeting and not advancing those conversations just yet, because the partners aren't quite ready to have that conversation yet. But that'll happen in 4 weeks' time.
Thank you.
Councillor White.
Yeah, kia ora. I just wanted to make a comment, observation, if you like, that congratulations, really, for getting the read across the line. I smiled a bit when you said that people are really surprised. You've got a small lands trust, I believe, Rahui Lands Trust, and the Hapu and Ngāti Hokopu, who've come on board. You know, I mean, Ngāti Awa are the big entity, but your approach that you use, from my observation anyway, and understanding, is that you're very transparent in your offerings to them. They could see education, they could see employment opportunities, training opportunities in that space. So good on them. But importantly, good on you guys too. You know, listen, and there are many other opportunities like that around if only people would use an approach like you have done. And I'm living in another jurisdiction, but I can see what's happened here. And I just want to say congratulations and hope as well, because they need it.
Thank you, Phil. Very good presentation. Look forward to the...
When's opening?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be a good two years of construction post. Not for the boat harbour itself, but the buildings will probably take the longest component, but it'll be a two-year sort of rough horizon.
Look forward to it.
Thanks very much. Much appreciated. So, councillors, this takes us to agenda item 10, Chairperson's report. Can we take it as read? I'll move it. Seconded, Councillor Neese. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Right, open for discussion. Welcome, Councillor Crosby and Mr. Winters.
Oh, just, I'll draw a long bow, Mr Chairman. I noticed you're going to the Ahu Whenua Trophy in Ruatoki, Toreri, and more recently Taranaki. Great. My question is, in previous years, Mr Chairman, we have sponsored Bay of Plenty Farmer of the Year, Central Plateau Farmer of the Year awards, but somehow we've dropped the ball there. Is it we've pulled sponsorship, or are we not being invited to sponsor some farming awards in those presentations? I don't know.
I'll ask the Chief Executive. The only one that I'm aware that we sponsor is, or co-sponsor, is Balance Farming Board.
Yes, that's correct. And through you, I did get your request, we followed up. My understanding was that we weren't asked to sponsor.
We weren't asked.
Yes, that was from Pimatamonchi. So I can follow up again. But I think the key thing is to ensure that the impact staff decision in terms of the greatest impact for the community with what we're
Yeah.
doing.
Okay, I might follow that.
Anything else, councillors? I think there's one issue in here worth reflecting on, and that demonstrates the very difficult environment in which we're working, especially with Whakatane and Untitled. So you'll see on the 28th of April, we had a very good relationship, or some of us had a very good relationship meeting with Whakatane in Tauranga, and came away from there very enthused that we had a body in terms of Ngāi Wahoo who were mandated to speak on behalf of the Taio. The next morning, we had a reality check in terms of the wider Ngātarangi Nui iwi, saying, well, those people don't speak for us. So I just raised it as an issue that as we go through the freshwater reforms, this is the type of tension that our Māori council is going to help us try and resolve, because we can't take a position and endorse an approach from one and the next day we get sidelined by the other. Councillor E.T. knows there's other examples in the Bay which we're endeavouring to deal with, but it's a very difficult environment which we have to, or staff have to work. Councillor McDonald.
Mr Chair, all I could implore to ourselves around this table and our staff, please come and ask us.
Thank you. Okay, that's been done. No other questions? Councillor
Yes,
White.
Mr Chair. Yeah, look, just on the 4th of May, I noticed that you met with Lodestone Energy, and I understand that they're a solar farming enterprise, looking at like Whakatane coming down to Hamilton or Waikato into Whakatane and Edgecombe. So that's a very interesting scenario. Have you got anything that you want to share on that space, Mr Chair?
Yes, we did have a meeting with Lodestone. It's been in the wind for 6 months or more now. The location of these sites is one at Edgecombe, one at Waitahi, one in Northland, and the other one is at Whitianga. The Northland proposal will go first. The Waitahi and Edgecombe proposals will be 23 when they're starting. The one at Edgecombe is probably the biggest at about 143 hectares, I think. So yes, I think it's a trend in terms of land use change in those environments where there is an ability, because these solar farms have to be next door to substations. So the capacity of the substation, or Lodestone has a negotiation with Transpower in terms of what do they have to do to the substation. They're enthusiastic. In their view, they have the view that it will lower power prices to the consumer. I'm not so sure. You can see that in any commercial relationship, and it's essentially funded. It's a New Zealand company. The principals are two Canadian guys who have had experience in this before.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chair, because the reason why I raised this one is that we've had a similar approach, not from Lodestone Energy in Rotorua, about building these solar farms. Obviously, from a environmental point of view, they're probably a strong case for them, but yeah, they're hunting now, they're hunting around, so I just wanted to get a little bit more information from you about where's this all headed to.
Thank you. Councillor Ness.
Thank you. I think Councillor White raised that. The Chief Executive said that we went through a presentation on that, and that raised a question in my mind. If I understood it correctly, it's the solar farms are going to coexist with farming operations. So do you have any information on how that happens? Do the sheep or whatever just wander in between the panels and graze?
So the concept is that these panels will move with the movement of the sun, so they're on a pivot. They're constructed probably a minimum of 2 metres high from the ground. There's gaps in between them. The idea that you can graze stock underneath, fine, you can graze sheep, but if you have sheep, you've really got to have a shearing shed. As Councillor Von Douglasson knows, so when we raised this issue with them in terms of the utilisation of that, they said their preferred stance initially is that the existing landowner will be offered the rights to graze, so that will be up to the landowner to what he does. The difference between some of the other agencies that are out in the market looking for places is Lodestone actually acquire the property off the current owners, whereas the other examples, and there's good examples out of Australia where they actually lease the land for a period of 20 or 25 years or something, then they renegotiate. So those are the two current examples, but Lodestone buy the properties. Anything else, councillors? Not? We'll move on to the rates collection update, 10.2. Annabelle, Glenn. So councillors, this is an update on a previously adopted position that we've taken in terms of proposal to keep going with our own rates.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and councillors. Before I start on the highlights of the report, I'd like to introduce Glenn Parkin to you. Glenn is our Enterprise Systems Manager, and he is also our workstream lead for data and reporting in this project. So as the Chairman mentioned, in October last year, Council decided to collect its rates in-house rather than through the 7 TAs within the region. And the main drivers for that was increased visibility with the community of council activities, greater control over the rating process and being able to apply more equity across the region in terms of remission policies and efficiencies as well. We're in a good position in terms of our operational readiness to take on the rates collection function now, particularly in light of our increased level of service around customer support with our service centre that we have now, a dedicated customer contact centre, and also the upgrade of our physical facilities, so a much better customer interface with the public when they come in to see us. So we're much better set up than we would have been in the past to now take on the rates collection function. One of the key objectives of the project implementation is making sure that the customer experience through the transition is as easy as possible, and that's a huge focus for the project team. We've been working with our TAs on the transition and transfer, and we've been meeting with them to discuss what that looks like, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we need from the TAs and how we've been working with them.
Thanks, Annabelle. So like Annabelle mentioned, we've met with all the TAs so far to introduce ourselves and talk about the project. My work stream that I'm involved with is data and reporting, and the data is going to be critically important information we get from the TAs so we can accurately run a rate strike. So we've actually already received some information from Tauranga, River Lakes and Western Bay, and so we're working through that process about making sure we've got the right information, that it's good information so that we can mail the correct people and send the rates bills to the right place, and we've got up-to-date accurate information. So I guess the goal that we're trying to work towards in our work is to simplify the process for the TAs, so to make it as easy as possible for them to supply us the information, and we'll kind of take care of the data cleansing and the sorting out of the information on our end so that it's nice and clean, and importantly it matches with the information that's held at the TAs as well. So it's a real partnership here that we're working towards. We're just at the early stages, I guess, with that, but everyone's been really helpful so far from the TAs, and now it's just about testing our processes.
So, Annabelle, just before we go on, Councillor Crosby, you had a question?
Up for questions at the moment. Yeah, thank you, Annabelle. When I was reading the report, it was hard to distinguish in the finances what the net effect was. You've got a gross effect, but obviously we're paying through service agreements all the TLAs at the moment. And I may have missed it, but I was struggling to find what the net difference was going to be in terms of cost.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct, and we don't know that yet. We know it will be significantly cheaper to collect rates in-house from the information we've gathered. But some of the decisions we need to make around the structure of the rates team and the services that we're providing will determine the cost. So we're still at the discovery phase and the research phase at the moment. We haven't yet made some key decisions around those, and one of those is the technology system that we have in the procurement plan that we're asking you to approve today. we are out at the moment to the market, we've had proposals back in, and there is a variance in the costs of those technology solutions. So depending on what we choose, will then feed into the costs for the project.
So there's a lot of questions that come forward, Annabelle. Do you want to finish the presentation that you've got, and then we'll deal with the questions?
Absolutely. So we have cross-functional project team with a number of work streams. We've got legal and compliance, rate setting and finance, rates collection, customer experience, and data reporting. So it's quite a complex project, but we have all these work streams in place with experts on those work streams to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. With the technology solution, we're only looking at proven systems within New Zealand of councils that have successfully run that system for a number of years. So we're just trying to de-risk that as much as possible, because technology is going to be one of the key things to enable us to collect rates. The top risks are around the customer experience and making sure that's as positive as possible, the technology system implementation, and as Glenn alluded to, the quality of the data that we're getting from the TAs.
Okay. Right, we've got Councillor Von Duddleston, then Winters.
Yeah.
Neves and then Luck.
So my question is around the data collection. You've got 7 councils, is it 6 or 7? Do they all have a similar technology database now that's marriable to you? Or are you, because I'm worried about, you say any system is only as good as the data, and rubbish in, rubbish out. And it's not the initial data that worries me, I'm sure you'll get that right, but it's the ongoing update, because it will need to be updated all the time. So you're confident that you can manage, first of all, are all the systems different, or are many of them similar, and can you manage that process of keeping the data valid and secure?
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a challenge, and we recognise that. There is some consistency across the different TAs around the systems they're using, but I think I mentioned before, our approach is to basically take a lot of that heavy lifting away from them, so they'll just supply us the fields that we need essentially, and we do the work on our end to clean the information. And so that's the way we're approaching that, and we're going to have those good relationships with the TAs to ensure that continues to happen. But yeah, there is some consistency there, so we know what we're dealing with, and we've got a good team involved to work out where the gaps may be.
Just as a supplementary, have any of the, especially the smaller TAs, considered using us for collecting their rates the other way around?
Through you, Mr Chair, that's something that we're getting ready for in the future. So all the decisions we're making around this project is to future-proof us for anything that might happen in terms of one council collecting rates on behalf of others, or a shared service to the platform.
Councillor Winters.
Oh yeah, Annabelle, we had a fairly big serve from Opotiki District Council through the long-term deliberations. They didn't know about it, but apparently you did. You had been in consultation with it. So how are we going to get on with people who don't have access to internet banking? They like to pay their rates at a desk somewhere. Are we going to have a shop somewhere, or is it going to be Opotiki?
Through you, Chair, that is an issue. We only have 3 offices in the region, and the TAs have not just their main office, but some service centres around. One of the things we're looking at is agency arrangements with the likes of New Zealand Post. So they actually have more coverage across the region than any of the TAs do. So they are in a number of remote areas around the region, and you can go into the post shop and pay over the counter your rates. There are probably, I think there's a dozen councils in New Zealand that do use New Zealand Post as an agency, so that's the solution we're looking at for those customers.
I like that. Councillor Neves.
Thank you, Glenn. This is a business critical system, and it's got a whole lot of very sensitive data, and I just was musing listening to national radio on my way here this morning about the system breach that they had over in Waikato. And when I looked at the procurement plan, I see we have some references to security and a risk framework. But can you tell me what provision you're actually building into our plan to minimise cyber risks?
Well, through you, Chair. Sumit Chopra, who presents at the Risk and Assurance Committee on Cyber Security, is well on top of this. He's part of the one of the work streams in terms of system implementation, but not only system implementation, but customer portal and customer data, etc. So the legal and compliance work stream looks at the Privacy Act as well, and making sure that we've closed out all the risks around the Privacy Act. And we have very strict security standards, and we have with the RFP that we put out, we have a very robust security requirements that we put out, and they must be able to meet those to be eligible to be a system that we're considering. So they are government standard government agency security requirements. And then obviously through the system testing when we're implementing, we test those out as well.
Excellent, just as long as it's top of mind. The other issue I've got is we are looking at introducing equity for our ratepayers across the region. And there is a risk that, and it sits with us really, when we set our rating policies and our remission policies, etc., we may end up with some people being disadvantaged by our policies relative to what they had before. So is that a risk that you are also considering, and will that be adequately reflected to us when we're looking at our rating policies?
Through you, Chair, yes, you mentioned in the report that there will be a policy workshop held with you later on, and I expect all of those options to be presented to you, including what the ratepayer is currently benefiting for across the region, and whether you want to hold on to those and apply them across everybody, or whether you just want to pick and mix. All of those options will be presented in workshop with you in the coming months.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two of my questions have been answered already on security and approach key. The only point I would like to make residually is, of course, this project was first raised by Audit and Risk some 8 years ago, and I'm just delighted to see it's coming to fruition. It's taken even longer than elephant's mating, but at least we're getting some result at the end of it.
Thank you, Mr. Love. Just a follow-up question, Annabelle. The original justification for this was we could do it cheaper, but your comments in here were rather neutral in terms of I expect it to be lower. I think the expectation from this group of governors is that it will be lower, but we don't want you to change us in terms of the customer experience in order to do that. But to give a justification, we really have to drive and show to the consumer, the ratepayer, that we're doing it more effectively and efficiently.
Supplementary, Mr. Chairman. One of the main reasons we decided we wanted to do it in the first place wasn't just to produce a cheaper rate collection system, but also to give the Bay of Plenty Regional Council identity. We know that we are the big unknown in the Bay of Plenty, and part of the justification of going out is that people will see how much they're paying instead of just having it tacked on as one global amount. And we will have the opportunity to, in that way, connect directly with the ratepayers.
Thank you, Mr. Love. Councillor White.
Yeah, Phil, just a question on the technology systems. You've got, in a year's time, expecting to have this up and running, and you've got a list of scenarios or criteria there. You must have a pretty good handle on who's out there. Is there a healthy list of potential suppliers, or is it pretty skinny? I note that they've got to have a lot of experience with council.
Through you, Chair, yes, we did a whole lot of research with councils around the country, and there's 7 providers in New Zealand. 2 were discounted for various reasons. One couldn't supply to us. The other one only had 1 customer in New Zealand, so we didn't think that was a good enough test. So there were 5 remaining. We had some quite strong criteria around eligibility, and they had to demonstrate that they had a current regional council in New Zealand, because district and city councils are slightly different to us. And so only 3 out of that pack actually qualified for the RFP process and were taken through to the evaluation process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, no further questions. I'll move the adoption of the report. Second to Councillor Winters. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Takes us to the next agenda item, 10.3, Eastern Bay Country Road Safety Group appointment.
I'll move we receive the report, note its contents and nominate Councillor Clark.
I'll second that.
Okay, let's move Councillor Thurston, second to Councillor Wheaton. So I'll put this. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Can someone succinctly tell me the difference between the operations group and what currently exists? It's a bit difficult to understand in terms of the text that we read.
I would appreciate some clarity in the same thing, particularly as the last group kind of filled the bits. A little bit of background. One of the reasons why I did for it is that every meeting that coincided with the regional council meetings, so I was unable to attend most of them, and some of the quality of the presentation wasn't anywhere near what it should do. But having had a discussion yesterday with a cycle advocate who heard I was actually standing for this position, according to Councillor Thurston, he came round to my place last night to invigorate me and say, well, good idea, I'm right on your side, and we'll be in touch. So I guess that will be some life in the new committee. Thank you.
Okay.
And through you, Chair, I can add to that. In the past, there's been a number of groups focused on safety, so this is putting all into one group and making it having all the people at the same table, because in the past we've had multiple groups. So it's a very good step forward when you look at the membership of the group and who's proposed to be around the table.
Mr. Von Dulcie.
I wonder if we could have a comment from the Regional Transport Chair, just to give us a bit of background. The Western Bay ran for many years the same sort of committee, and I thought it was quite an effective committee. It was decided to bring it in within the Regional Transport Committee. How much road safety stuff are we getting from the regional, how much emphasis does the Regional Transport Committee, which now manages Western Bay, receive?
Through you, Chairman, answering your first question and support me here, Councillor Neves, as Worship Mayor of Western Bay made it very, very clear that they would paddle their own canoe. They did not have a bar of any of this, and they would continue to do what they have always done. So that's an answer to that. In terms of road safety issues at the Regional Transport Committee, we have tirelessly worked to get the police there. And I think Council needs support here. I think in the last 3 or 4 meetings, they've been conspicuous by their absence, the police. So we've put out another call for them to even nominate other individuals within the establishment who can come along and represent the police. But no, that is the conduit, you're correct, for the road safety issues. And this is a restructure to refine that process. But I'll just reiterate my comments about your question about Western Bay. They have made it very, very clear that they don't have a bar of any new structure, and they will continue to do what they have always done.
Councillor Neves.
If I can comment, I think there were internal politics within Western Bay, and I think that drove the conversation that the Mayor wanted not to have elected officials around that table, which is why it ended up with just a staff group. With regard to the regional Transport Committee's responsibility about safety, the intention is, isn't it, Councillor Thurston, that these road safety committees will report back regularly to the Regional Transport Committee.
Thank you for that update. That's really helpful to me. In the past, police have always attended the Western Bay one, and with really good input, as have ACC. I was pretty disappointed to see the Western Bay one dropped.
Okay, thank you, councillors. We will move on. 10.4, Whakatane Tuatoro, Performance Monitoring Report, Order 3.
He wants to get home.
Chairman, councillors, Fiona. Yes, it's my pleasure this morning to introduce Aotake for the 9 months ended 31st of March 2021. It's Council's Performance Monitoring Report. Our support staff, Tobias Branson, is on VC. I'm going to hand over very shortly to Tobias to step through the non-financial performance in the Aotake attachment. And then Liliana Toro, I'd like to introduce our management accountant team lead to step through the financial analysis. Thank you, Tobias.
Thank you, Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Tobias and I'm going to present the non-financial performance results for the first 3 quarters of the year. By the 31st of March, we were generally speaking in a good position with 22 out of our 33 performance measures on track and forecasted to achieve the year-end targets. For 8 of our measures, we're yet to receive data and have therefore not provided a full year forecast. This is mainly due to them being of an annual monitoring frequency. One measure has no data available due to changes in the underlying activity, regional economic development. That is the same as it's been during Q1 and Q2. And finally, 2 of our measures are currently forecasted to be at risk of not achieving their year-end target. These are the same measures as was flagged during Q1 and Q2, and I'll get to them in a minute. Positive highlights during the quarter includes the number of priority biodiversity sites that have come into active management. This year so far, it's 7 new sites have come into management, which is well above the yearly target of 4 sites. Furthermore, the percentage of issued discounts from the resource consents team due to them exceeding their processing timelines is currently sitting at 2%, where a lower number is better. These 2% is well ahead of the same figure last year, 3.1%, and the annual target of 5%. So that's very positive news. The 2 measures that are at risk of not meeting their full year targets are displayed at the bottom of this slide. Firstly, the replacement of non-compliant burners. By the end of Q3, 118 burners have been replaced, which can be compared to 230 burners at the same time last year. This is largely attributed to the number of burners that have previously been replaced through the program, meaning that there is a smaller pool of non-compliant burners to be replaced for each quarter that goes by. So victims of our own success, so to speak. Since the air quality heating scheme closed for more applications on the last of April, the number of replacements will drop significantly in the 4th quarter, thereby making the full year target unlikely to be achieved. The second measure that has been flagged previously to be at risk of not achieving its full year target is the passenger transport trips. This is largely due to the lower patronage levels that followed the COVID restrictions. There has, however, in the 3rd quarter been many positive signs, where the Tauranga urban services, for example, had their strongest March in 3 years, and the school services have actually had their strongest Q3 in 3 years. This has increased the full year forecast to 2.58 million trips, but that is still well off the full year target of 2.95 million trips. So it's therefore still forecasted as not achieving the target. That concludes my part of the presentation. Any questions?
Any questions, councillors? Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure to present the financial position, forecasted financial position of the council. I refer you to page 14 in your agendas. In summary,
Debbie, can you just speak up a bit?
Sure.
Thanks.
In summary, as at the end of Q3, 31st of March, we are forecasting a total operating deficit of 12.6 million, which is 0.3 million better than the 12.9 million operating deficit budgeted for in the annual plan 2021. This is driven by operating revenue expected to be 1.4 million lower than planned, and operating expenses expected to be 1.7 million lower than our annual plan. Capital revenue is forecast to be 13 million by the end of the financial year. This is 5.4 million lower than expected to our annual plan. This gives us our total surplus forecasted to be 0.4 million. That's 5.2 million, lower than our expected annual plan. We have capital expenditure forecasted to be 40.3 million at year end. This is 14.1 million underspend against our annual plan. Further detailed analysis and comments are on pages 16 to 20 of your packs. Are there any questions?
Mr. Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, delighted always to see the report as Chairman of Risk and Assurance. I've taken some keen interest in it. Unfortunately, on this particular occasion, I haven't had an opportunity to discuss it with the staff beforehand, but having reviewed it myself, I'm quite content to say that I think it presents us as we ought to be. Our performance against budget is good in most respects and unexplained when it's not. So overall, as Chairman of Risk and Assurance, I'm content with the report.
Thank you, Mr. Love. Any other questions? Councillor Neese.
Thank you. I see that the Rotorua Lakes incentives underspend is repaid over the LTP. And forgive me, I may not have the full story here, and that's what I'm seeking. Perhaps from somebody, I'm not sure who. I understand that a resolution was passed at the recent Te Aroha Lakes meeting that funding should be diverted from our land incentive scheme to the Rotorua Sewerage scheme. And I want to be clear if this actually happened. And I understand our reps may have voted for this. And my opinion is that if so, this should be discussed by this council first before we supported such a resolution. And I do understand it was a surprise, but could I have some commentary on this, please, and some implications of further proposed action?
Councillor, Chief Executive.
Yes, through you, Chair, we are working on giving you a full briefing. This occurred on Friday, so we're still getting information in terms of the next steps. What I do plan to do is to write to the CEO of Rotorua Lakes Council and just outline the decision-making process from here in terms of how we see it, and also the likely scenarios in terms of whether the Minister agrees to reallocate funding or not. So you'll recall with deed funding, it's the Minister for the Environment that needs to agree if there is a change to the allocations. At the moment, Rotorua Lakes Council asked the Minister for additional funding to go into that reticulation scheme, and now they're also suggesting a review of the deed funding allocation. And so what I am in the process of doing is writing to the Chief Executive outlining the decision-making process as we see it based on that resolution. And I will give you a full briefing, but this occurred on Friday, so we're in the train. In terms of what's in our long-term plan, that stands in terms of the allocation of the incentives funding, and so, but there may be a decision that the Minister makes in due course.
So I just need to be clear, are we on record as supporting this, given the recommendation and resolution on Friday?
Yes, the resolution that Rotorua Te Aroha Lakes Strategy Group was made within their delegated their terms of reference, and it was to seek to review the allocations if the Minister for the Environment does not agree to additional funding.
So we haven't necessarily approved losing some of that funding.
That's correct. It's not that within the terms of reference of the strategy group, it has to come back to the parent to make their own decisions in terms of their funding appropriations.
Mr. Thurston.
I'm just ducking Councillor Neves' arrow. I'm very limp-wristed saying I'm not a member of that committee and I wasn't there, so I don't know if someone else can speak for who was there.
I think the Chief Executive's covered it off adequately, and at the appropriate time you'll get a full report in terms of what the context was. In the meantime, we have not committed ourselves to a defined course of action in respect to that.
And I have brought this up at a council meeting on previous occasions, Mr. Chairman, of the deficit in funding for the Rotorua scheme, and that we needed a way forward. The Mayor moved the resolution, Lakes Trust and Council voted for it, so we're only 2 votes. but it is a plan B. It is a plan B that if the Minister Parker doesn't resolve to add another 10 million to the road and the road mask scheme, remembering it's gone from 35 million to 53 million, that scheme, we've put in 8 million. If Minister Parker doesn't resolve to add 10 million, that's when the resolution kicks in, Jane. It comes back to us, and then the Minister will have to change the deed, the trust deed funding to take incentive money to the sewage scheme. It's a two-step process. I've already briefed the Chair, and Chris was there in terms of the way forward, but I think I brought this to the attention of this group, this council before. At our previous meeting, there were similar resolutions that weren't passed, and I think it's Chief Executive has given a really good explanation.
Thank you, Councillor Winters, and the Chief Executive might like to consider in terms of their report to Council, addressing the ultimate issue here, which is the accountability for a significant capital cost overrun in a project that should have been pretty simple. So we'll move on. I have one last question, Juliana, and that is, well, you might not be able to answer this, the $4 million underspent in terms of the capital project for the Whakatane land purchase restoration. How far away is that? Is it, I mean, is it the next 6 months or the next 6 years? That's essentially the question.
Well, we're hopefully going to have there's some valuation work going on at the moment. So yeah, we'll hopefully have some answers in the next month.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, councillors? No, very good. So moved, Councillor Winters, seconded Councillor Love. All those in favour say aye. Against? Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Miliana. And Tobias, you're still with us. Right, I'll move we go into public excluded. Oh, yeah, that's right, we'll do that. I'll move we go into public excluded. Seconded Councillor Clark.